I'm recording this session. It will go live, like recording. Who will be attending able to see. I'm starting the live webinar, and from here, people like after 2 minutes you can start the. It gives window for people to join in. Rohini is also. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Rohini. Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Rohini.
Hi, Madhurima.
Hi, nice to meet you. Hi, Somya.
Same here.
Should I put only the speaker on the screen, or you want this frame?
I think speaker only will be better, Pranav, because
Yeah.
uh, just to think, Pranav, I don't see any attendees joining yet. Just make sure they are able to join.
Yes, let me just
I'm
let
literally
me start
concerned.
this webinar,
Okay.
and then let's see how the people.
Okay.
I'm starting. We are going live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see you all coming into the webinar room. We'll just give a few minutes, maybe a couple of minutes, so that no one misses the early part of the webinar. Thank you for your patience. You can still see people actively coming in. So let's just give it a couple of minutes to everyone, for everyone to be in. Really great to see you all. Okay, it's 2 p.m. in India, so I think it's time we get going a little bit. Is that okay, Pranav and Madhurima? Shall we get started?
Yeah, sounds good. I think
Sounds good.
we're ready. Yeah.
People will be coming in. Okay, everyone, welcome and good afternoon if you're in India, and good day to you if you're joining from other parts of the world. It's really wonderful to have you all here. I have to say on behalf of Madhurima that our workshop announcement received quite a response. And we can see that with the number of attendees and joinees within the first few minutes of the first workshop. The genesis of this workshop stemmed from plans for a potential collaboration between India Bioscience and Taylor and Francis. And there was a lot of brainstorming, a lot of back and forth conversations and meetings between Madhurima and me, and what would be really useful to the community. How could we partner, leveraging our network in the ecosystem and their tools and technologies, and how could we together get correct resource personnel for a workshop of this kind. And we identified that written communication in science, whether it's through manuscripts, grants, or public sharing of science, was an area which definitely needed a workshop, more than a webinar. It can't just be a talk, but we also have to provide you with the tools so that you can practice some of the ideas and inputs that you received during the session. And that's how the genesis, that's how the idea of this workshop came about. And then we contacted our resource personnel, Punyasloke, Somdata, and Madan. They were on board, so thank you. And you will be interacting with them in the course of the next 3 days, starting from today. So how can you make the most of this workshop? Well, for one thing, attending the entire session. The second thing is please use the Q&A box to type in your questions. We will collate and regularly take them, and our resource personnel will respond to them. Another thing you can do is use the chat window to engage, to say you liked something, didn't like something, have a new idea, think about something differently, have a new perspective. So that can be in the chat window. A specific question can be in the Q&A box. Another thing you can do to make the most of this opportunity is attend all 3 sessions. An e-certificate is only a byproduct of your attendance. What we really want you to take away is the learning and the opportunity to interact with these resource personnel. So with that, I'm Karishma, the Executive Director of India Bioscience, and welcome to this collaboration between India Bioscience and Taylor and Francis. My colleague Madhurima represents Taylor and Francis, and she's the head of marketing, open research for all of South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa from the Taylor and Francis group. So thank you, Madhurima, for this collaboration. And our resource personnel for the day, Punyasloke Bhadury, is a faculty at IISER Kolkata. And Punyasloke, I Googled you, and needless to say, you have hundreds of publications and thousands of citations and several thousands of reads. So that makes you very appropriate to be leading this first segment of the workshop on manuscript writing. I think that. We'll keep it short and sweet because we want to hear from you over the course of this 2-hour workshop. So it's structured after this introduction. We will have a brief talks from Madhurima and Punyasloke. They'll be very insightful. They'll be very specific on tools and technologies that you can use for manuscript writing, tips and tricks. And then we'll move into the interactive engaging segment where you'll be doing something with the resource personnel. Finally, we'll end with a half an hour of open Q&A. And we look forward to all your questions. All right, so with that, I will stop talking. And Punyasloke and Madhurima, it's now your turn to talk. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaushik, and also Dr. Madhurima Kahali. I think this is fantastic to be here. And I was just keeping an eye on the number of participants, just like Karishma has been. Its number is steadily increasing. Thank you, Karishma, for your generous introduction about mine. I think this is rather a very difficult topic to discuss, but I think I'll share what I think, how do we write a manuscript, or rather I should say, how do we write a good manuscript? So let me quickly go and share my presentation. I hope you can see the presentation. Hopefully it should show up. Yes, great. Excellent. So I've kept it very simple and straightforward, how to write a manuscript, but I think it should be how to write a good manuscript. I think ideas and data are all great, but I think how do we translate those ideas and data into a manuscript is rather challenging. I anticipate that most of the participants in this webinar, which India Bioscience and Taylor and Francis are jointly organizing, most of them would be probably first timer who are planning to write manuscripts, or somebody or many of the attendees would be ones who have written manuscript, face challenges, or also many young faculty members who want to write even better manuscripts. So I will share some of my thoughts. How do we navigate? And it will have a mixture of pretty much everything in it, mostly the tips, I would say, based on the experiences that I have gained so far. So very briefly, I'm not advertising my professional career, but I'm trying to highlight, as I have been editor of several journals over 10 to 15 years now. For example, I am an editor of iScience, which is a self-pressed journal, editor of Geoscience Letters, again, a society journal, editor of Lithosphere, a society journal, associate editor of Ecological Solutions and Evidence, again, it's a society journal, editor of Peergy and Open Access Journal, editor mentor for Access Microbiology, again, a society journal, editor of scientific reports for more than 10 years now, and of course, advisor of Ecology and Global Change, is a faculty of 1000 Research Global Gateway platform, is again an open access platform. I routinely review papers, manuscripts of many journals, including Nature Geoscience, at least 1 to 2 papers in every year, Nature Climate Change, at least one paper, Science Advances, 1 paper, and of course, many journals under the Taylor and Francis. It's difficult to write everything, but just highlighted 2 of them, Marine Biology Research and Critical Reviews in Microbiology. So this provides me with an opportunity to handle a large number of manuscripts, and also gives an opportunity to understand how authors write their manuscripts, and all whatever I'm now going to jot down or highlight in the next few slides is going to be like an amalgamation of these experiences and my own experiences so far of writing manuscripts. Well, there's 2 important things to keep in mind. Good writing is rewriting. So when you're writing a manuscript, this is something which is extremely important. The more you write manuscripts, the better it gets. So there is, frankly speaking, no platform or no guideline on how to write a good manuscripts. It's domain specific, it's subdomain specific, or probably it's sub-discipline or discipline specific. You have to look at your audience, you have to look how good your data is, and how do you, if I may say so, quote unquote, sell your data in the form of that manuscript. So therefore, this is explicitly a rewriting mechanism. But one of the important things in writing a manuscript or a good manuscript is the flow should be very important. How you have written the manuscript and how that manuscript is being resonated when an editor and the reviewers are handling it, because the editor and the reviewers do not know. But most importantly, your readership globally, because once the paper is published, it's actually the readership who are going to read this manuscript. They are eventually going to learn from your manuscript and they're going to cite the manuscript. So therefore, this is extremely, extremely critical. And that will define how you yourself define as a good manuscript and a great manuscript. So couple of important things to keep in mind when you're writing a manuscript, that enough time is required to work, and writing is a process. There's no way when you're writing a manuscript for the first time, it's not going to be a good paper at the first time. So perfection comes as time flows. So this is something I wanted to highlight to many of the early career researchers who might be attending this webinar, that when you're writing a manuscript, you have submitted it, maybe you have not got the reviews that you expected. Don't be disheartened. Take those reviews very objectively and integrate yourself when you so that you can improve those manuscripts. I wanted to highlight that even experienced authors struggle to organize papers. This is actually factual. This is not a fiction. And therefore, when you are writing a manuscript, we have to keep on revising the manuscripts. We keep on saving the drafts in different names, and ultimately the final draft and the initial draft, you see how much it has evolved along the way, and the final product is much more different or very different compared to what you actually wrote down in the beginning. Please remember that the quality of the writing reflects the quality of the research. This is absolutely important. And what do I mean by that? You have done fantastic research, but you have not managed to translate that research finding in the form of good writing, quote unquote good writing. So therefore, this is something we have to master, and we will keep highlighting, give you some tips as part of this webinar. Uh, one easy approach when I was a PhD student was that, my advisor told me that why you read papers, see how good papers, the authors in the good papers or the good publications, how they have written and how great papers are written. So basically read those papers and try to understand the way, the fluidity and the resonation of the writing. So this is absolutely critical, and I think that plays a very, very important role. It need not be that you have to copy from those what they have done, but you need to learn how they have fluidly or very succinctly written the things down and connected everything together. So this is very, very critical. So these 4 points are extremely important when you are planning to write a manuscript. Now the question that comes down to is, when do I start to write a manuscript? I think this is something which is extremely important. Well, I think the answer is very straightforward. You have got some very exciting and interesting findings, and you want to share with the global community. So you yourself is judging that this finding could be very, very important. And I think you don't want it to be kept within the 4 boundaries of your laboratory or in your computer desk. You wanted the world to know about it. So therefore, that's something, a judgment that you will have to make. Now, if you are a PhD student, of course, that judgment you make by sitting with your advisor or by interacting with your advisor. That's something, an advantage that you have. The second point is, do you have enough data? That means how good is your data? How robust is your data? That's something which is also critical, which will lay the foundation of whether I should go ahead and write the manuscript or not. Third point, which is I believe is very important, and again, this is my personal opinion, of course, that if a manuscript you're writing, and let's say there are more than 2 authors, or there are more than 1 author is there, then obviously you have to have an agreement with the co-authors or the co-author. That means this is the data I've got. I think this is the hypothesis. This data is either proving or disapproving, whatever we want to say it, or this is something which is new, and your co-author or co-authors need to agree with your thinking process, or maybe they can help you refine your thinking process. So that is in itself is something very critical. Even for experienced authors also, they might be writing with a global community of authors. So they bring down together all the authors together and write. So there is an agreement has to be there in terms of that. Yes, this is something which makes sense, and I think we should put it up. So this third point, I believe personally, is very, very important if you, of course, have co-author or co-authors in it. And last but not the least, of course, we need to publish manuscripts, and there are multiple reasons why you need to publish the manuscripts. Of course, there could be professional reasons. You want to publish and you want to write grants, and you want your grant application to be successful. So you need some publications, or you're building your CV. You're an early career researcher who is transitioning from a PhD into a postdoc, or taking up an independent position. You need peer-reviewed publication, irrespective of the subject or the domain that you are working in. So manuscript writing or publication of a manuscript, it kinds of gives an impression that you started with something and you have the end product, which is this publication. That means you're able to take up a problem and you are able to find a solution to the problem, possibly. So these 4 important things might be taken into consideration when you start, or you have made up your mind that yes, this is the time I can go ahead and write a manuscript. Now, I know Dr. Kahali is going to focus on this point, but I'm not going to go too much on this. Selection of a journal is very, very critical. What type of journal you're targeting? Does this journal represent a wider audience? I'm not going to name any journal specific. Or is this a journal which is very specific for a particular discipline or a sub-discipline? So there are specialized audiences out there, So you can clearly understand wider audience and specialized audience. These are disparate things. They're not the same, which means you might be working on immunology, but your information that you have garnered or gathered, you have written it into a manuscript. Somebody who is working on ecology also finds your manuscript very interesting to read and learns from it. So that's how your audience is determined. Does the work fit with the aims and scope of the journal? This is very, very critical. Sometimes we don't really look into that very thoroughly. Every journal clearly highlights the aims and the scope. And many times what happens is, even when I was a PhD student, it happened. I submitted a manuscript and it came back within few hours saying that it is beyond the scope of the journal. So I did not look at the aims or the scope of the journal very thoroughly. Dr. Kahal is going to highlight that more intricately. What type of manuscript you want to write down or you want to communicate? Is it a full-length paper? Is it a short note or a correspondence? Is it a review paper? Is it a paper on perspectives? So, for example, if it's a review paper or a perspective paper, these days mostly the editor-in-chief or the editors, they tend to have a discussion with you over email or electronically to come to an agreement that yes, we welcome such review papers or perspectives before you submit the manuscript. Okay, so that's something which is very, very critical. Last but not the least, journal citation report. I'm not going to go into that, but I leave it to you, to all of you to figure out. Although I must say that a discipline or a sub-discipline, a specific journal may not necessarily have a very high impact factor. So I think it depends upon how it is perceived in your community. That's going to be very, very critical. Now, there are 4 fundamental components when you are writing a manuscript. It doesn't matter whether it's a science-based or an economics-based or a history-based manuscript. It doesn't matter what it is type. What is the statement of the problems? You should be able to pose a question, and that's extremely critical. You should be able to present the evidences, keeping in mind the question or the questions that you have posed in. And the validity of the evidences must be based on some assessment. So, for example, what are the strength or the weakness of these evidences? Are there any other anecdotal evidences are there or not? I think this point number 3 is extremely critical. And last but not the least, of course, the conclusion that you draw. That means what does something come out of that manuscript, or what does new this manuscript tells about. So these 4 steps are very, very critical when we write a manuscript. And this is a broad framework of any manuscript writing, to be very honest with you. But you please see that these 4 steps are interconnected, and these 4 steps can be achieved when you have drafted the language more or less correctly. And the first draft of a manuscript is very, very critical and very, very important. So for early career researchers who are attending this webinar, I want to highlight that please spend time on it, draft it to the best of your abilities, then you pass it to your advisor or to anybody senior. One of the things that works very nicely is, when you are an early career researcher, let's say you're in a research group and there are many senior PhD researchers are there. Once you've drafted it, you can pass it to your senior researchers in that group. They can give the feedback. You can then improve it and then ultimately pass it to your advisor. But again, it's not a hard-bound rule. It's all about how you do it. But the first draft must or should take into account all these 4 points that I've highlighted. I think that's going to be extremely, extremely critical. Now, all of us, we know, I think, what should go into a manuscript really. But I think this is something just I put it down to kind of keeping in mind that there will be audiences who are completely new. So I'm not going to go into that in detail, but I think these points are very clear, important to highlight. You should have a title page, authors, abstract, introduction, methods. Sometimes some methods might go into the supplementary information, depending upon the type of the journal that you're targeting. Results, discussion, acknowledgements, literature cited, figure and table legends, figures and tables. Of course, if you're working with animal models, then of course animal ethics clearances you have to provide. If you're working with human cohorts, then of course human ethics clearances. You have to make sure that there's no financial issues are there. There are no conflicts of interest are there. Those things also need to be kind of included. So this is the general layout of any manuscript. But again, all are going to depend upon which journal you are targeting in. Now, when you're writing a manuscript, there's so many ways to do it. And I'm going to give you only one approach in this webinar. And it can vary. And therefore, I've said an approach out of many. So it can be many approaches that can be taken. Usually, when I write a manuscript, I try to see the data that I have in. Okay, I first make all the figures ready, essentially. And then I see, based on those figures, what I start to draft the results of it. Okay. And figures need not be the narration, the results need not be exact narration of the figures. Okay, that's something also to keep in mind, and I'm going to highlight that. And then once that is done, then I go into the methods, then I go into the introduction, and then I come to one of the most critical components of a manuscript, which is the discussion. And then it is followed by literature cited, title page. But last but not the least, before the acknowledgement, abstract is very, very critical. You know, abstract is a mini paper, and it's absolutely critical. You see, these days, many journals receive huge number of submissions, okay, manuscript submissions. Unfortunately, or whatever the limitations are, one of the biggest challenges that we face as a global community is that there are lesser number of reviewers available to review manuscripts. So editors, what they do is, nobody is perfect, and editors are also not perfect, including me. So what we do is we usually read the title and we read the abstract, and then we quickly glance through the manuscript. And it can be sometimes objective in nature, you know, and we might be wrong. Sometimes we might be correct, but based on that broad framework, then then the editor takes a decision to pass it to the editorial board members, and then the editorial board members actually go through the manuscript to take a call whether it should go out for peer review or not. So you can understand, editor-in-chief really gets so many manuscripts, and it's impossible for him or her or to anybody to look through all those manuscripts in detail. Okay, editorial office helps him or her out, but ultimately it's something that's a human issue. So therefore, abstract, I believe, is very, very critical, because abstracts provides a complete synopsis of really what is there in that manuscript, what you are trying to sell in terms of the data or in terms of the new findings. So this is an approach that can be taken. It's not like it has to be taken, but something that I typically do when I write the manuscript. Now, what do I do when I write the manuscript? So as if I go very quickly, if I go into the result section of a manuscript as I'm writing, I actually plan the sequence in which the data is to be presented. This is very, very critical. It need not be that I have to include everything, all the data that I've generated in that manuscript. Okay. I need to take a call on like which data will go into the manuscript and which data might be left out for the time being, may not be required, or which data would go into the main part of the manuscript, or which data would end up as a supplementary file. You know, I'm going to go into that. But one thing is very sure is that the sequence in which the data is to be presented or will be presented must tell a story or narrate a story. This is very critical. So the results is going to tell a story or narrate a story. And essentially that is what is magnifying when you're looking at the manuscript as a whole. So to be able to do that, we, as I was saying, we arrange this data and we prioritize, of course. But when you do that, when you write those in kinds of words and sentences, we need to be very, very clear, concise, and straightforward. It's a good practice probably to avoid writing complex sentences. Writing simple sentences probably is very, very helpful, you know. And when you are writing these results section, we need to keep in mind that the corresponding protocols by using which these data have been generated, they have been adequately described in the manuscript. So it's like you have put up a figure, but how this data got generated is not very clear to the reviewers or to the editor. You know, that can then create a confusion. So this is something which is extremely, extremely important. Again, these are some of my own personal thoughts when I write manuscripts or when I read the manuscripts that have come for editorial decision-making process. The text of the results need to have some synchronicity with the data presented, either in the figures or in the tables. Okay. Now, what has gone in the figures need not be in the tables. It's just you are essentially copycatting the same thing over and over again. So please avoid that. It might be a great idea in the results section to have transition statements from one subsection to another. So that's kind of a rationalizing it. I think this keeps the reviewers engaged, or I would say it keeps the editor engaged. Authors find the editors find the flow of the manuscript. manuscript, and that flow is applicable anywhere. It need not be just the results section. I highlighted the results section because that's something which sells your manuscript to a large extent, to be very honest with you. In the results, there is no need to discuss, in terms of a bigger context, unless and until the journal guidelines explicitly state it. Some journals say that you can put results and discussion together, let's say, then you can do that. But if that's not the case, please do not discuss the findings or the results under the results section. It will start to create confusion. You might end up getting the reviewers disengaged from your manuscript. Okay. And please do not misunderstand, the reviewers are ultimately also human, and they can also make errors. So we need to keep that thing in mind. And it is important that when you're writing these things, please do not write any sentences or that indicates that you're drawing conclusion. So it may not be a good idea to draw a conclusion in this section. So results means essentially what you have got and what you are highlighting need not be again ditto of what the figures are saying, but kind of in a broad perspective, you are saying it while keeping the flow interconnected. And this, if you see this broad framework which I've laid down, you take any paper which has come out in any journal, you will see that largely the papers follow it. There could be some minor deviation, but that's not what we are highlighting out here. One important thing I always see is when papers come to me, the figures, and there are a lot of issues out there. The figures should be very clear and not too crowded. It should have large enough font so that when it's being kind of the figures are being embedded and a PDF file is generated when you have submitted a manuscript, it is readable. Multi-panel figures might be very, very important depending upon if you're working on cell biology or immunology or molecular biology, even ecology also, for example. Legends are sufficiently detailed. Please do not just give a very generalistic legend. I think the legend must tell what is the figure is all about. And one thing I frequently occur, I observe, some manuscripts have come to me and I see that the data which are in the figures, some way or other, they are not matching with the results and discussion. So what has happened is, in this case, is the author, the lead author, let's say, he or she, whoever it is, has put all the data together and compiled them in terms of figures, but then did not look at those when writing the results. So there is a interconnectivity is gone, or some information is missing, and that kind of creates the disparity in some sense, or the when the results are being looked with the figures. I want to highlight one thing: reviewers look through the figures very carefully. Okay, most reviewers do it. So, for example, very common thing: you've got confocal microscopy images. The figures should have the I would say what I call it as the denomination in terms of at what resolution these images are taken. Okay, scale bar we call it, right? If scale bar is not there, this is something which is expected by default to be there, right? So please make sure those things are there. Tables should not have the same data of figures. This is a very common error, by the way, and please avoid this. I see this is something which actually distracts the editor, and then ultimately it gets sent back to the authors. So that's what I was trying to point out, that you please look at your draft very carefully. Once you do that, these chances of these errors are rather minimal, or you will not encounter those. Now, once I've written these results, tables, everything, of course, we get the results and the figures and the tables. Of course, there has to be some methods that we have used. So materials and methods are very, very important. Technical description of the use of procedures are very critical. Some journals will allow you to write so much in the main body. Okay. And very big journals, if I may say, quote unquote, they would like you to write those all in the supplementary information. But believe me, all the reviewers, as far as I know, whom I interact with, they download the supplementary files and they go through it. Okay, that's what a good reviewer does. Okay, and so please make sure that the technical description of the use of these procedures are very critical. If you have used statistical analysis, please detail them how you have done it. And of course, there could be some papers you have submitted to some journals, where the entire thing can go as supplementary information, but make sure all the details are there so that there is no question. Why that is important on a much bigger, broader context is you have done hard work, and let's say you have published these papers, all this information are there, right? Now some readership is there who is another early career researcher at some part in some part of the world. He or she is reading that and getting valuable information of how you have performed those experiments, and then he or she takes up and does those experiments, okay, or integrate some of those experiments when he or she is trying to validate it. So this is extremely critical. I think introduction is I believe is one of the toughest parts in a manuscript. Okay, and that of course lays the foundation of the manuscript. So it's a kind of now I'm reverse way I have been looking at it, but I'm now coming back to the most important component. I think introduction needs to set the stage for presenting this exciting or the interesting data that you want to present. Okay, so this is very critical. You need to put in few lines on the general area in link with the study. Otherwise, this is going to be completely disjointed. Specific few lines on the theme or the topic. So that's like a flow. You started with the generalistic one and then you're going to the specific ones. Ultimately, you make sure there are hypothesis is there, or there are hypotheses are there, or there is hypothesis, and what has been done to test the hypothesis. Please do not discuss results here. I come across quite a few number of manuscripts in many journals in the where the section where the objective or where the hypothesis and the objectives are there. Let's say I see last two lines are about the results. That may not be required. Okay, so but please make sure hypothesis is definitely there. Testable hypothesis must be there. Otherwise, how would that manuscript fit in with the wider objectives that you're planning to do or setting? I think another important aspect is, of course, the discussion. Once you have got the results, the figures, the methods, the introduction, I think you have now started to build the blocks. So you think of this is a house you are building. That's a 2-story house or a 3-story house. But if your base pillars, the ground floor pillars are not strong enough, the house is not going to hold. So it's like you're giving a finishing touch to a product, and the second floor or the third floor is essentially based upon those results, the introduction and the materials and methods. So discussion is more like a downstream thing. The discussion may highlight the major findings of the studies, and that needs to be recapped. You need to again bring back the reviewer and engage it. Please understand what happens, and this is my understanding and my experiences. Say reviewers, if they get your manuscript, they read through it, then they are doing some other work, again they come back and read it, right? It's quite common. And so if in the discussion section this recapping of the major findings are there in the first few lines, I think that again connects the reviewer. Okay, yes, I remember this is what these authors are trying to say or were saying in their results section. So that's something which would be very critical. Emphasizing the novelty is of course important, no doubt about it, but please do not outstretch it or overstretch it, whatever you want to say it. We have to be very realistic with what the novelty is in. How does a finding fits in with what is already known? So you need to discuss it in terms of the similarities or dissimilarities, let's say. You have put up a hypothesis, remember, in the introduction section. Now in the discussion section, this hypothesis, has it been proven right or wrong, whatever it is, and what are the findings based on this hypothesis? How does it fit in with what has been already known? So that is something very critical. How does your findings of your manuscript open up the potential avenues for new research? So does it lay a foundation for new area to work upon? Does it lay a foundation for new questions to address? Sometimes we put up a hypothesis, we get the results, and then the results sets a framework for new hypothesis. So that's something also is very critical. What are the implications of your findings? So let's think in this way. you are working, let's say, I give you an example to suppose you're working on ecology. Let's say you are working in some river, one river somewhere in India. Okay. And this river is very interesting river. What is a possibility some researcher based in South America is ever going to work on that river in that India? Never, probably, right? But he or she can learn the findings or the implications of the findings from your study, and that would imbibe him or her to come up with testable hypotheses that he or she can test in his or her country or his or her geographic region. So please understand what I'm trying to say. Please avoid saying this is the first study which has done this, or this is the first study that has done this. I think that may not necessarily be the case. Of course, you have done it means probably, you will always like to say that this is the first thing that has been done, no doubt about it. But please try to kind of look it into a broader global context. Your audience is global in nature. You have done work, let's say in India, but your audience could be sitting, let's say somewhere in Malawi or in Nigeria or in Brazil, or he or she is learning from your work. So I think that's something which we should keep in mind. And of course, conclusion is essentially a very critical component of the manuscript, which gives you a subtle ending to what has really been found out or what you have found in the manuscript. So these steps I believe are very, very critical when you are writing the manuscript. Please remember that there are two other important things that are very important, very, very essential when you're writing a manuscript. The title page. Nowadays, journals limit the number of words in a title. Okay, and there's nothing wrong in it. I think that's pretty good. You write the title, but the title should be succinct enough, and it must describe the main findings of the study. And you can see very often you come up across publications which are very catchy title, right? And it draws your attention, and that's something which you learn as you start to sail in the ocean of publishing manuscript. You start in a small boat, and then you start to steer big boats and ship, and that's how you progress along the way. Abstract, as I was saying before, is extremely important. Abstract is a mini paper, and therefore the other reason is abstract also have word limitations. Some journals have word limitations of, in terms of abstract, 150 words. Some have 300 words. So lesser the number of words, the more challenging is for you or for me to communicate everything within those limitations. And I know how challenging it is, believe me. So you have to summarize the study, includes the methods, approaches used, findings, conclusions. I believe that the abstract may require many drafts to formulate and present the argument more concisely. Because why I say that is that's what happens, when you submit a manuscript. Unfortunately, given the sheer number of submissions happen in many journals, and this we cannot disagree. So this abstract writing is something which is very critical, and that should have connectivity of what you have laid down in the broader part of the manuscript. I think I end up saying again this slide which I put up before, that enough time is required to work and write a paper. Writing a first paper it may sound challenging, but believe me, it's not a challenge. It's a process, and you have taken a fantastic task and you will achieve that task. Please focus on it and please give your best. So, and remember, it's never perfect for anybody, but maybe this webinar will give you some ideas and hopefully might have helped you to give some thinking process that how do we tackle it. Ending up saying that quality of the writing reflects the quality of the research. Please remember, this is very, very critical, and therefore redrafting a manuscript is extremely important, and it is a final draft that you're going to submit is going to end up with the peer review system, or the reviewers, with the editors. So, and once you have submitted the manuscript, clicked on the submission button, it's in the system and you have to wait for the outcome. I end up saying that sometimes we say that the review process might be faulty. I think no process is perfect, frankly speaking, right? So there could be faults, there could be errors, but I think we always take all of these things very positively. Your paper might get rejected in one journal. You had very high hope. Please don't get disheartened. Take those feedbacks, integrate some of those feedbacks which you think can be integrated by talking with your advisor or talking with your colleagues who are in the co-authors, and you'll see that your manuscript has become even more improved. And when you submit it to a next journal, the chances of it selling through or getting accepted are much higher. So I end up here, and I now pass the baton to Dr. Kahali. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhadury. I think that was very interesting, very enlightening. I'm sure all the participants here have a lot of questions, as I can already see here. I think you elucidated the entire process of publishing, of manuscript writing very well. So I would now request my colleague Pranav to kindly share my slides on the screen. Hi, Pranav, can you put it on slideshow, please? Okay, so as Pranav puts it on slideshow, I would like to welcome everyone here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the wonderful response to our webinar announcement. And we hope that this workshop is useful to everybody that's attending here. And in fact, for those who are asking, yes, you will get a recording of the presentation. In fact, some of the people who registered but were unable to attend the workshop live for some reason will receive the recording and also be able to see it live streamed. So thank you, Karishma, for the kind introduction, and Dr. Bhadury for your enlightening talk here. So I'm Madhurima Kahali. I work as the head of marketing for open research at DNF. And I look at both South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa regions. I've worked in the publishing industry for close to a decade now in various capacities, ranging from being a journal publisher to book editor, and finally as a lead for open research and researcher engagement. I hold a PhD in genetics, and I'm very passionate about scientific communication, academic publishing, and reading in general. So with that brief introduction, let me quickly jump to our presentation. Next slide, please. So talking about Taylor and Francis, we are a very old and reputable company established more than 2 centuries ago. And from our network of offices in New Delhi, Oxfordshire, New York, Philadelphia, Singapore, Beijing, DNF staff provides local expertise and support to our editors, societies, and authors. So we also provide tailored and efficient customer services to our partners ranging from, partners like India Bioscience to academic institutions and societies that we are working with. We publish over 2,600 journals and approximately 7,000 new books every year and have a backlist of over 150,000 specialist titles. Next slide, please. So we have been connecting research and research avenues to millions of researchers across the globe. Most of our journals are indexed with the well-known indexes that you would know about, from PubMed to Web of Sciences, Scopus, and the works. Next slide. So Dr. Bhadury has already beautifully covered the essentials of good manuscript writing. So in my slides, I would be covering some of those and, to not be redundant to the ones here, I would be stressing a little bit more on certain elements of the presentations and maybe quickly skipping through some of the slides that I'm presenting here. So broadly, we've already seen, heard about manuscript writing from Dr. Bhadury's presentation. I'll be touching upon it a little bit, majorly on how to choose and evaluate a journal that you would like to submit your article to, what goes behind the scenes in journal publishing, simple steps to improve your chances of publication, and how to market and amplify the research that you have published. Next slide. So starting from the first topic, which is choosing the right journal. So, so at TNF, we offer you a whole range of journals across subject areas as well as disciplines. We offer you high quality, rigorously peer reviewed, niche as well as broad scope journals, including more than 250 full open access journals. And we have, please have a look at our website. I would request Pranav to type in the link to our website, and you can have a look at our website and browse through the various offerings in STEM, humanities, as well as social sciences. Next slide. Since most of you would be from the biological sciences background, Pranav, could you go to the next slide, please? I'll give you a brief overview of the biosciences journal list that we have. So we have over 100 journals that are focused on biological sciences, and these exclude agriculture, veterinary sciences, and also there are about 50, 60 more journals in those areas. So these are just biotech, etc., where we have over 100 journals, 34 of which are full open access. And all the other journals have an option, which are called hybrid journals. They have an option for publishing your article OA. More than 95% of these journals are indexed with Scopus. A huge percentage, again, is indexed with Web of Science, and over 30% are also indexed in PubMed. Next slide, please. So this is something which Dr. Bhadury also touched upon, and that's why I'll go through this quickly. The reasons to publish. Now, to this audience, I don't need to delineate or talk about the various reasons that you need for publications, apart from, your mandatory guidelines for promotion or, thesis submission. You also publish to exchange ideas, to disseminate your work globally, and also to build a reputation and network. So whenever you have an idea, so once you have your research complete and you have an idea to publish, just think in mind that your paper should be original, not in terms of a breakthrough research, but something original that you need to communicate, which hasn't been communicated before. It could be, a common topic, but, your experiment is supporting the work that's already published. So think about what new is it that you have to say? Is there a solution that you're offering? Is there a change in methodology? It could be the minutest thing that's there, but you should have a story behind the publication that you would want to, publish. Next slide. So quick overview of the stages any author goes through before submitting the article. We would highly recommend, workshopping your paper, or setting up an academic writing circle with, friends and peers. Remember that, someone reading it from outside your discipline sometime may actually pick up on inconsistencies or ideas that need explaining further that you may not have noticed before. So these are the various stages before submission. Moving on to the next slide. So the big question now, how to choose an appropriate journal. Please know that with most reputable publishers, a large percentage, sometimes even 1/3 of the paper submissions are rejected, a desk rejected due to unsuitability of the journal. So you may have done a great job, but maybe the journal is not the perfect house for your article. So even with TNF and with a lot of other publishers also, you would have option for article transfer where your article is then matched to the right journal. But again, that's a big problem itself. So why not do a thorough homework at your end before putting in your hard work, creating that article, because every journal would have their own specifications. So, do a thorough analysis of the journal to see whether, it is, whether your article is a good fit for that journal. So it's advisable for you to track key issues, topics in your field, to also sign up for TOC alerts, table of content alerts, which a lot of journals offer, to see, what are those journals that publishes the kind of research that you are working on. So see whether people you read usually publish, talk to people who have previously published in, the journals that you're aiming for, see what their experience has been. Sometimes it's also advisable to write to the editor. They may not always be available to answer your queries because they are dealing with thousands of submissions, and full academic careers otherwise, apart from the work they're doing as an editor. But you can reach out to the publisher, to the editor, check, if there are any call for papers on the topics that you're working on. So several publishers also have this tool called a journal suggestor tool, which with TNF also we have, where and in fact, the Pranav would have shared the activity, the manuscript writing activity for you in the chat box, where we have actually given you an abstract and a link to the journal suggestor tool. So it's a great tool for you to just go to use and see, find a good match of journals against the article that you want to publish. So look at the journal suggestor tool also to see, where you can actually publish your journal, publish your article. Next slide. So all publishers would have their journal pages, dedicated journal pages. So you go there, there would be a statement of what the journal seeks to publish and who is the main audience for it. So read the, aims and scopes to understand the kind of papers, the article types that, the journal is accepting. Often it takes a short time, just a couple of minutes for you to read through it. You would also see the journal metrics, sometimes those are of importance to you. The indexing status, whether it has an impact factor, what's the turnaround time of articles. So these would also be metrics that you would find on the journal pages. So it's always advisable for you to do that check before submitting. Do this for multiple journals. Have a list of journals, that alternate journals that you can seek out to for your article. So next slide, please. So I already spoke about the various journals that we have. Apart from the traditional journals, we also have another exciting offering, which is called F1000. So it's a scholarly publisher that was established in 2013 with a very unique publishing model, which is designed to make research findings as accessible, usable, reusable as possible. So thus accelerating the potential for research to have a quick impact. So F1000 was acquired by Taylor & Francis Group in 2020, intended to expand our open access offerings to the researchers. So F1000's publishing venues are called publishing platforms, and all of these platforms, they behave like individual journals. They would have an ISSN numbers, and they would be indexed in various subject indexes that are there. And all of these venues offer a sound science approach and a broad scope as well as multidisciplinary. So it would be great for you to go have a look at F1000 website. F1000 Research is the flagship journal, which gets a lot of articles in both biological as well as biomedical, medical sciences. Next slide. Okay. Now, again, for your search of journals, now here are some key questions to answer when deciding which journal would you like to submit your paper to. And most of these, as I said, could be found on the journal's homepage. And for you to answer would also be things like, what's the readership that you intend to reach out to? Where would most of the audience of your journal be located? Sometimes research can be very niche, and there's a certain regional approach to it, and you would want to reach out to a niche audience, or sometimes it would be very broad. So have a good understanding about the readership also that you want to reach out to. Look at who your article is aimed at. So is it researchers, practitioners, policymakers, general public? I'm assuming the audience here mostly would be focused on researchers and all, but there are some articles which make a lot of sense to policymakers, for general public. So just have in mind the readership and see which journal could be reaching out to those readers the most easily. Next slide, please. Okay, now with the advent of open access, with so many journals and offerings in front of you, in the recent years, we have seen the rise of fraudulent activity on the part of organizations that claim to provide services to researchers. And many, if not all, of you would be aware of predatory publishers. So these entities present themselves as legitimate publishers, editors in journals. They will usually inundate your email boxes with invitations to publish your articles with them, even when the journal is out of your area of expertise. So predatory publishers have many characteristics in common with the reputable publishers. So you would sometimes in common, like the predatory publishers would have many common characteristics. So you would see that their website contain incorrect or misleading information, sometimes mimicking reputable journals to confuse you. So the editorial board will feature names of well-established researchers who may have never agreed to be a part of the board. They also promise very fast peer review and short turnaround time for in exchange of a fee. But publishing standards are not being upheld. So they are being the peer reviews being compromised, and sometimes it's fabricated, sometimes it's not happening at all. So they often would also have very confusing or unclear information about publication fee. And usually it would be charged to you even before your article is accepted. Next slide. So overall, if you see, predatory publishing practices are diversifying and becoming more and more sophisticated. And it's increasingly becoming difficult to identify, track, and monitor these journals and to distinguish them from confidence with poorly resourced or low quality journals. So sometimes there are journals which are just starting off, newer journals. They may not be fraudulent or predatory journals, but how do you understand, whether this is predatory or not? So the key thing to remember is that legitimate publishers will apply the same high standards of publishing to open access publishing. So they would, uh, so both your articles that are open access as well as those that are non-open access would undergo a similar peer review processes, and would have sort of similar acceptance rates, and also they wouldn't be prioritizing open access publishing, which is usually in return of a fee. So the Inter-Academy Partnership is a global network of over 140 national and regional merit-based academies. And the output on the slide here is from their report, Combating Predatory Academic Journals and Conferences. So they have shown a spectrum here. This is being created as an alternative to the existing binary definitions. So the scale aims to make it possible for authors to identify poor practices and behaviors regardless of whether they are practiced in a journal that's considered to be predatory or not. So the spectrum approach is a stimulus for starting a new, more nuanced conversation that avoids the oversimplified classification of, a good or a bad journal. So this is a project which is still underway, and I think would be helpful for the researchers to know about. In fact, other than that, you can always go to think.check.submit, to see whether the journal that you want to publish in, whether it's reputable or not, whether it's up there or not. And always be sure to check the various indexes, whether the journal is indexed with an open access one would be usually indexed with DOAJ. Other than that, Web of Science, Scopus, PubMed. So these are all the various checks that one should do, because publishing your article in a journal that is predatory is sometimes a missed opportunity. You've put in a lot of hard work, a lot of sweat and blood, and you would want your article to reach the right venue so that you have, a proper credit given to the work that you've published. So moving on to the next slide. So writing for a journal. Now, this section I will probably quickly go through because Dr. Bhadury has covered most of it. So next slide, please. So this is a instruction for authors are really key. So, one should, when you're going on a journal page before submission, just read through them thoroughly to make sure you followed the requirements of the journal. Every journal would have their own specifications. Please make sure you look at, how to submit, what are the peer review, word limit, etc., referencing style and all. Next slide. Now, here are some top do's and don'ts. Okay, now I'm not going to read through all of these, but two of the really key points to pull out here, and again, that is important, is instruction for authors. So Now let's see what other things that you have to do here. So when you are publishing, or you're about to submit an article, summarize the results. Okay, no, don't just list topics that have to be discussed. Put what's new and what makes your article different, at the start of the article. Use clear, concise language that could be understood by someone outside your field. Include keywords within the first 65 characters in the title. Avoid abbreviations, unnecessary acronyms, numbers, and formulae in the title. Think about how someone will search for your research. Also, keep this in mind that your article has been published, but it also has to reach the right audience. So, whenever a person who wants to look for articles in your field would be searching for it. So, design your abstract and your title, keeping in mind what their search query could be, how they would, how your paper would land up in, the Google search that they do, or, once they go to a journal website, how would your paper come up, at the top. So consider what most reviewers may be asked to decide whether they wish to review your paper on the basis of the title and abstract. So your paper also has to look exciting to the reviewer. That's your job to impress them. So they will look at your title, they'll look at your abstract. So, work on it carefully, make it interesting for them also to have a look at. And most of abstracts are always available and freely accessible, even for articles that are behind a paywall. So these abstracts are fully crawled and accessible by anyone across. So most readers will only read the abstracts and then decide whether they want to read your article or not. So invest a lot in those abstracts that you write. Next slide. So in the recent years, we've seen an increase in ethical issues in journal publishing. Okay, so from redundant publication, salami slicing, to ghost and gift authorship. So here are some guidelines that an author must always keep in mind. So always reference your own work as well as anyone else's work that you have referred to in your paper. So always refer to them, cite them. Only have your paper under consideration by one journal at a time. Submitting the same paper to more than one journal means a number of reviewers could be reviewing the same paper needlessly. Or in the worst scenario, what may happen is, since some of the work that you would be doing are in niche areas, your paper from two different journals may reach to the same reviewer to review, and that's not a good situation to be in. It's of course ethically incorrect. So do not do multiple submission of your paper at different journals. So next, ensure contributors to your research are appropriately and properly acknowledged. Whether you're the corresponding author or the co-author, make sure you know where the research is being published. Okay, you are 100% accountable for the research that has your name on it. So always know, you may be a part of a big research group, but any research that is published with your name in it, it's kind of a stamp for you that this you have, you can be held accountable if there's some issue with the article, if there is some maybe there's a ethical malpractice or something that it was flagged or highlighted somewhere. So please always be aware of where you have been put as an author. So even on papers that have like 100 authors, so you should always know. Of course, you would be signing those forms, but be aware of what is the content of the paper and where is it going, which journal is it going to. Declare any potential conflicts of interest that could be. If your research involves human participants, you will need a statement about ethics, board approval, or maybe why an ethics board approval was not required, whatever the case be. There can be copyright issues, so make sure you have written permission to use any third-party material in your research, such as image or data sets. Okay, nowadays, flagging plagiarism issues are common, so be aware of this. So I've put in some links here. You can, like, the author services has a lot of guidelines for authors, very descriptive, and really helpful for researchers, both early career as well as the established ones. Next slide. This is just a quick checklist again of the things that one needs to keep in mind. So these are a part of the editorial policies. Check for affiliations, authorship, citations, competing interest. There's any like harassment, images, figures. So these are things which are a part of the editorial policies, which you should always have a detailed look at on the journal page. Next page, next slide. Again, quickly. So there are plenty of steps that you can take to increase the likelihood of being accepted when it comes to language issues. So for all of us, for most of us here, English is not our first language. So we may have, issues there. So here are some basic tips to help make your argument easy to read and understand. Okay, to gain a good understanding about how to communicate your research, I suggest you read a lot. Firstly, see what are the writing style of various papers. So the absolute best thing that one can do to be a great writer is to read great writers in their field. And, same holds true for any researcher that's writing a research article. See how papers, how authors structure their papers and arguments, how they present their data, model your paper structure after theirs sometimes. So if at all possible, write your paper first and edit it later. This will help you create a, true line paper where, you would already have a story with you and you can do whatever editing that you need to do later. Simplicity is key. So especially when you're dealing with complex problems in theory, so think about your sentence structure, use of passive voice. Sentences should be kept relatively short. Usually recommend 2.5 lines on a page. Otherwise, the reader may lose track of your point. So you should also think about varying of your sentences to create a rhythm in the writing. Lots of text, long running sentences sometimes get monotonous and people may, stop reading after a point. Now, passive voices in sentences is sometimes necessary, such as in methods section, where it is common to write that the research was conducted rather than, I conducted the research or we conducted the research. But make sure to, mix it up with active voices at some places. Now, the goal is to make it as easy as possible for your reader to understand your arguments and evidence. The most important strategy to achieving this is to create a clear and easy to follow structure to your paper. For research articles, irrespective of discipline, most academic papers follow this model written here, which is aimed at, so introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. So, think of it as an interesting story that you are telling your audience. So I think it is useful to remember your role as a storyteller. It is up to you to give life to the exciting story of, research that you have worked on and translate the passion you have for your subject and make it easy and interesting for your readers to read. Next slide. So one last point on manuscript and writing process, and again, Dr. Bhadury touched upon this, is have as many people read and comment on your work throughout the writing process. You have many resources that you can draw upon to receive good critical feedback. Now, first of all, you have your local network, your PhD committee, or your colleagues and peers. Find those colleagues who will give you a tough, detailed feedback. Sometimes who will tear your paper apart with the goal of making it better. So those will be the big red pens. Now it is also important to have those supportive colleagues, who will pat on your back and say, good job, because you have to keep going. Sometimes, even within your PhD tenure, you would be publishing, say, 3 or 4 papers. So, but to get your paper in the best possible shape, you need all those feedback in. Also, regional and international conferences are a great place to share earlier version of your paper. So one of the positive outcomes of the past couple of years, COVID et al., has been that conferences have become a bit more accessible. as they've moved online. So do try to participate in conferences if you're able to. They provide the opportunity to receive feedback from researchers, both outside and within your current network. So, okay, so can we go to the next slide? All right, now submission. This is, of course, very critical. So now, when you go to, in most cases, for your article, and like for all of you, I guess, you will be submitting to an online system. So make sure that you have all the files on hand that you need to submit, including the anonymized version of your paper, supplementary files, data set, artwork, etc. To avoid any problems or mistakes, make sure you have an agreed upon plan with any co-authors on who is responsible for what and which journal you're submitting to. Also be certain that you have the correct information for all co-authors, such as their preferred spellings, their name of their recent institute, the affiliations, etc. So make sure that the version you submit is the final version and not an earlier draft. So then go to the journal website, and there would be the submit button where you can go and submit your article in. So often Scholar One Manuscript or Editorial Manager are the submission system that you would see. Next slide. Okay. Peer review. Now, peer review is something which the authors are always scared of, but if you ask me, it's a very, very positive process. So it's a collaborative process where authors can get constructive feedback from their peers to improve their research and engage in a dialogue with other people in the field. So there are three main types of peer review you're likely to come across, with double anonymous being the most common, usually in a lot of fields, including humanities, social sciences, and also in biological sciences also. So you may also hear this referred to as double blind. But since we have to be more inclusive, we are calling it double anonymous rather than we prefer calling it double anonymous and not double blind. So single anonymous peer review is when the peer reviewer knows the identity of the author, but the author does not know the identity of the peer reviewer. Unlike double anonymous, where both are hidden, both the identities are hidden. Finally, there's open peer review, where all the identities are known. This is the least common and is these days used by certain open access journals and platform. Our own platform, F1000, has open peer review, which you would see in the various preprints, where your articles are open to receiving reviews there, and the authors can also respond to the peer review directly on the portal. So this is of course tricky because sometimes you do not want the reviews to be public, but it's also sometimes a need of the hour, maybe when there's a lot of question on the whole peer review system. Maybe this a bit of a radical change may be useful for us. Next slide. Now, quickly, the traditional peer review process is, these are the few steps there. When the editorial team receives a manuscript, makes a quick assessment, which is called a desk assessment. It is then sent out to reviewers who either accept the article or suggest minor or major amendments, or they reject it and give the option to resubmit, or the other option is transfer. Sometimes your journal, if it is sound science, means it is scientifically sound, but it is the journal that you submitted into is not suitable for the article. It is then sent to the authors with a match of journals that would be more suitable for your article, and you can make that transfer, like you can transfer your submission into the more suitable journal. Finally, there's feedback that's sent to the author. The author amends the article and sends it back to the editorial office. It undergoes all the steps at the production end of it. Finally, your article is published at the end of this cycle. Next slide. And quickly, some very common reasons for rejections. As I, said earlier, is, the biggest reason for rejection is that sending the article to a wrong journal where the article does not fit the aims and scopes of the journal. So other reasons could be, the journal not accepting certain article types, your article not adhering to the various standards and specifications for the journal. Sometimes it is language issues. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's something wrong with the framework. Maybe it's poorly presented. Ultimately, if there are certain ethical and ethical issues that are flagged or the content is plagiarized. So these 10 reasons would be the most common reasons for rejection of articles. Next slide. Finally, this is the last section. Now, once you have received a decision, and decision could be either accepting with certain changes or rejection, you need to respond to the reviewers. So responding to the reviewers is an important part of the publishing process. So at times when you receive reviewer reports, it can feel like a rejection, especially with revise and resubmit with major revisions. So try not to become too upset. So maybe close the computer and step away for some time. When you're ready to get back to work, carefully read the decision letter. It may include advice on how to respond to the reviewer's comment and will provide information, which is like critical information about deadlines for returning your revisions. If you have co-authors, set up a meeting to review all of the reviewer comments and make certain to share the reports with everyone prior to your meeting. Go through the reviewer reports, make a list of all the suggestions or improvement, scope of improvement you may want to group the comments based on categories. Say, if there were certain comments on the literature review part, certain on the methodology, you may group all the suggestions to make it easier for you to address those. Go through that list and decide which recommendations would you like to adopt and make those changes. Now, here are some key points to avoiding the fate of going through the revision process a couple of times and still being rejected. So when you send back your revisions, you must include a note to the editor clearly detailing how you have addressed the peer review's concerns, where you have adopted the recommendation, clearly detail what you've changed and where that change can be located in the paper. Some journals welcome the use of track changes to help editors and peer reviewers see what you have done. So you won't necessarily agree to all the peer reviewer recommendations. In that case, you need to clearly and respectfully explain why you chose not to make those amendments. Be specific here. For instance, if a reviewer thought you should cite another paper, but you feel it's out of scope for your project, please explain why it is so. So both the reviewer and the editor understands. Review your response to the editor to make sure you've responded to all of the recommendations and action in a clear and professional manner. So this is your community, your network. You may end up submitting to the journal again in future. You may be asked to peer review articles yourself. You may want to become the board member someday. So keep this in mind during the process and remember that the editor and peer reviewers are trying their best to help you publish the best version of your article. Next slide. So once your article is published now, while the journal publishers are also doing their best, reaching out to readers, popularizing your content, but it is upon you to also, market your own publication. So briefly, here are the ways that you can maximize the impact of your paper, raising awareness of your research so that it's read, cited, and can reach people it needs in order to have an impact, a real world impact. So promote your work by posting updates and links on social media and academic and professional networking sites. You could add a brief summary and link your article to your department website maybe. Write blog pieces referencing your articles for different sites. Now, for very newsworthy items, you could also consider a press release. Sometimes you have a breakthrough research. You can think of a press release for those articles. So once your article is published, you can speak to your institution's press office if they have one, provide them with a link to your article and tag them in your social media posts. a basic email signature banner request form can be found on TNF author services. So, you may want to use that signature, on your emails. So we have, I will, after this session, I'll put in that link to the author services where you can read more about how to promote your published articles. And in fact, we will run the third session in this workshop on outreach and, how to make that research impactful, how to, reach out to various and wide audiences. Finally, next slide. Okay, so this is the last slide. With TNF, we do a lot of workshops and training for researchers at various stages. So, our workshops include talking about things such as ethics, plagiarism, how to be an effective peer reviewer. We have these boot camps, peer reviewer boot camps, where we actually invite people to sign up. And then, once you've done that course, we try to match your expertise to the journals that are there on our network. So you can go to our author services page where you can see the kind of events, blogs, and opportunities that we have for training and workshops, which will definitely help you in your research journey. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, and I hope this was useful to you. And I would now like to, pass on the stage to Karishma for, your words and maybe the stream of questions. I can see more
Yes,
than
but
99 questions.
questions, quite a few questions, Madhurima. Maybe what we can do before that, Pranav,
Yeah.
if you could again share the abstract and the suggested tool, maybe they could live demo it,
Sure,
Yeah.
Maybe
understood.
we can spend a few minutes doing that. So you've shared a standard abstract with them, right? Some abstract from your end.
Yes, it's a journal. It's a published article whose abstract I have put on the activity. So and there are a couple of questions that are there. Firstly, and this is the first question, like we said, for any author, that, once you have your research ready, you have a bit of a story ready, how do you select the most appropriate journal, where you can submit to?
Sounds good.
So,
So what I see, Madhurima and Pranav, is module 1. So maybe
yes.
everyone can click on that module. And Madhurima, you're getting some very nice words for your presentation.
Oh,
And as that is coming in, so maybe everyone can click on the journal suggested tool, which Pranav has just added, and also open the Word document. Okay, so I can open it and I see something starting with aromatic plants such as anise seed have a long traditional use, right? Okay, so maybe we all copy this and we go into the journal suggester tool. So maybe while we are using this tool, Madhurima, and click reveal suggested journals, you can tell us what is this database searching when we are
Yeah.
putting this? It's searching all the TNF journals?
Yes. So with most of the publishers, like not every publisher, but with some of the publishers. So just to make things very easy, like I in my initial slides, I mentioned that we have close to 2,700 journals, and in biological sciences alone, like biotech, computational biology, in these these areas alone, we have over 100 journals. So it's not always easy for you to, reach the right journal, and sometimes for PhD students and all, it's just a word of mouth. They would have heard certain journals, but no, for you to know that there are plenty of journals that you can submit to.
So
So
what I'm getting,
yeah,
Madhurima, is
this will make
Journal
it
of
easier.
Dietary Supplements,
Okay.
International Journal of Fruit Science, Food
Mhm.
Reviews International, Plant Biosystems, and several others, including
Yeah.
medicinal plants and others.
Right.
Okay. So this is something that anyone can do when they have a
Yes.
ready-made abstract. So
Yeah, so they will use the keywords, they'll use the title, and then match it to the articles that are there on these journals to see what could be the journals which has that have published most articles in a similar sort of a field for you. And then the work is the authors. They have that short list ready, and now they can go to each of these journals, look into the pages, check out the metrics, turnaround time, etc., and see what makes most sense for their article.
So what would be interesting for the potential authors to also know, Madhurima, is what exactly is this searching? Is it picking keywords from the abstract
Yes,
and
yes,
running it through previously published
yes,
works in these
exactly,
journals? Okay.
exactly.
Okay, so people have used this tool. That's great. Now, since we did it with a known abstract, maybe you can pick up an abstract that, any abstract. Maybe
Yeah,
you can
something that,
also,
yeah, that you
yeah,
already
we
worked.
haven't tried. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
something you're working on, or just any abstract from a paper. And can you tell us what you get with that? That will
Mhm.
be interesting. I'll also try that.
Yeah,
I'm going to try it with one of my own previous papers uh,
right.
in the time when I was a research group leader.
Mhm.
Okay, which now seems like a very long time ago. And this is something related to the use of optotracers in biofilms. Okay, so I'm going to try this and let's see what happens. Reveal suggested journals. So I hope everyone else is also trying this. And it's working. So what it shows up, so like I said, the abstract was on optotracers and biofilms. What it shows up, Punyasloke and Madhurima, is critical reviews in microbiology, biofouling, Journal of Oral Microbiology, reviews of anti-infective therapy, virulence, right, biotechnology, yeah, those kind of links. Okay, maybe we will put the link again. The journal suggested link, everyone, is right here. Adding it again. Adding it again here. So while they are using it, Madhurima, what's the sort of usage you see in Taylor Francis for this tool? Is it heavily used? Do you notice it's quite popular?
We are actually trying to share this tool as much as possible, because what we have observed lately is, so just to give you an estimate, we like receive hundreds and thousands of submissions in a year from, say from India alone, okay, and some great papers. But the problem that arises is, and it's very sad, when you have to reject 35% of these articles only because of unsuitability of journals. So these articles may be okay, but so there's a team which does that quick check on whether it matches the scope and all. And then if you've lost the game there, it's really sad, because
Yeah,
then even if we have a transfer process, but that's again a process. So you resubmit, you may the again it's like a long process, which just makes things difficult for you. Here you have a short list ready, and once you have a shortlist ready, it's easier for you. So you can go through the articles that those 4 or 5 journals publish, see whether, it makes sense. And some of the other publishers also may have these tools. So just, for you, you can get that Excel in place, put in all these journals and see, do that little,
search.
yeah,
Yeah,
search of yours and see what are the top journals that come out. And so,
come.
but once researchers started using these tools, they are able to find better journals. So, sometimes, for the broader, what we end up doing is maybe we see broad scope journal and everybody wants to publish in, say, a PLOS One or a scientific reports or something, but but every journal has their priority. So they may not be publishing a certain area in that point. So for us to receive at least a short list of journals, which is matches to your article, makes like, is maybe a good starting point for you in your publication
Process,
journey.
yeah, journey. Okay, so while people are trying it, Punyashlok and Madhurima, maybe we should get to so many questions that we have. So bulking a few, okay, I'll combine a few now because we won't get to them otherwise. Punyashlok, a question from a couple of people. Can PhD students, MSc students publish review articles independently?
Yeah, I think they can, but I think, if you're doing a PhD and if that review article has something to do with your ongoing PhD, let's say, or somewhere linked, maybe it's a great idea to speak with your PhD advisor, and just to be on board that all are on the same plane. But I think writing a review paper is a great thing, because it may sound like writing a review paper is very easy, but it's just exactly the opposite. It's the most difficult thing to do, because you're trying to compile everything together within set number of words and pages. So, and you have to bring some innovativeness in the review paper rather than being just descriptive. So yes, I think it's a good practice to improve your writing skill in some way.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. So, Madhurima, interesting question from Dr. Ragothaman. When we are looking at a paper, should we keep the figures in line with the text or then all at the end? It's also hard for an editor or reviewer to keep scrolling down and scrolling up and so what would be most suitable? In line or at the end?
Yeah, I think usually they all should go together. Like the text should go together and all the figures should go. It's just easier like for the formatting and for them also. Generally that is what we do. We provide them as separate files. So maybe at the end, rather than placing it there together, it would make more sense. But sometimes your journals specify this, what their requirement is. So this is what I think
Yes,
you
I
should check about
agree.
that, but usually, going as separate files just makes it
Is what, but then they all come in the end. When the pagination
yes.
happens, it all
Yeah,
comes at the end. And
they
then for a
would.
reviewer, you're scrolling up and down constantly,
That becomes a little difficult. But yeah, but otherwise that formatting would be like another step which
Yep, yep,
because initially it's just text and then you
exactly.
reformat it with that placement which will again adhere to all those guidelines. So I think that's why it's a little difficult, of course, but maybe Dr. Bhadury can also comment here on what is his like preferred way or how is it, or but is there any idea on how this could be done or what makes most sense?
I think most journals now are transitioning, including, I believe, in Taylor Francis also, that, you have flexibility in terms of how do you arrange the, components. Some reviewers like the results and the corresponding figures, just one after another. But again, some reviewers, they print the entire manuscript and they take the hard copy and review it,
Yes,
put their comments. So,
yes,
so I think it's a tough decision to make, but I think, of course, a flow would be something which is very good. But again, as Dr. Madhurima and you have also pointed out, Dr. Kaushik, that, pagination is an issue. I think that's also has to evolve and it is evolving. So unlike in chemistry journals where you have the latex format, right?
yeah,
And you can
yeah,
put things
exactly.
together. In
Yes,
biology, that flexibility probably is rather limited.
yes, true. Okay, moving on to other questions. For example, when you are taking an image from a previous paper, do you need to take a copyright permission or citing not enough? In my experience, copyright is needed. Citing is not been enough. Explicit consent is needed. Has that been your experience also, Madhurima and Punyasloke?
Yes, for journals,
Yes.
I think even if it is an open access paper which says that, reuse is permissible, for there also when you're taking an image, citation is not enough. Every journal would also have so you have to take permissions from that particular publisher, like whoever the journal owner is, and they would have guidelines on how, because you might like it's not true for all publishers and for all journals, but at some places they also charge for you to reuse the figures sometimes. But yes, all figures that you're reusing need permissions, like citation. Just
Permission.
citation is not sufficient.
And what about Punyasloke, about the use of paraphrasing? This must be such a problem in classroom assignments, teaching assignments. So, what about the use of paraphrasing and
I think it all depends upon, what you are writing and what is the subject or the domain that you are writing on, right? But I would say that again, yes, I agree with you. This is an issue. I think nothing is perfect, I suppose, So, I'll not answer this, but rather say that, leave it to the authors to figure it out how best to solve this. Yes.
Yep, yep. And do you recommend any plagiarism checks? Turnitin, has anything really worked
100%.
well? Yep,
100%.
yep, yep.
I think, as Dr. Kali was pointing out, when the manuscript is submitted to a journal, the journal office or the editorial staff members, they do that first thing. That's what they do, whether it's meeting the formatting criteria and whether there is any plagiarism is there or not. And I think it's becoming increasingly stricter given that the AI and ML tools are now into foray. So I think that something is going to become even more comprehensive, I believe.
Oh, yeah. So Satyam asks an interesting question, which is directly with what you said about AI. He said, what are the guidelines for AI generated text? Because as a default, even when we write on our own, it can be detected as AI text. So how does one navigate this moving forward? It's going to be hard to prove that you wrote it on your own.
Yeah, it is, yeah, it is very difficult. With TNF right now, we have strict guidelines against, the use of AI tools. Although it's now like earlier, like these tools were there available earlier, but now it's just so much more accessible. So even
Exactly.
before shooting an email, some people may be just proofreading it over Chat GPT and sending. But generally, like we should keep a balance. Like it's a like these are good tools, but how do we use them effectively so as to not create ethical issues, so as to not skip the process. Maybe like you can feed some articles and just say, give me a summary of these, and just put it in that discussion tab or somewhere, literature review. That is not right. So currently, like if like from a guidelines perspective, TNF of course is strongly against the use of AI tools, but there's just it's very difficult to actually mine it out, and to actually see whether any text has used AI or not, especially when you're using it in bits and pieces here and there. But yeah, Dr. Bhadury, if you have something, yeah.
No, I think I think whatever you said is right. I think only thing to add to it is that AI can be used to improve the
Yeah.
draft of the manuscript. Okay, you have you have prepared the draft. You can use AI to improve it, and you need to explicitly mention it in the cover letter when you're submitting the manuscript. Okay, some journals now have a system in place where you have to kind of clearly demarcate or say that you have used AI or Chat GPT or not. Okay, if you don't say it and still go ahead and submit, and it is being found out that you have done it, there are mechanisms in place to stop probably those authors from submitting manuscript in that journal. And I believe the publishing community is also evolving very fast. It's a big challenge that is being faced with, but I know they're going to find a solution to this problem very soon. So
Just
it's
like
an
our
evolving domain.
image duplication, plagiarism,
Exactly.
we found tools and algorithms that can
Exactly.
detect patterns and things like that, right? And now probably at the back end, most of these are being run through these tools before they are sent out for review.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's no longer by eye, is no longer sufficient or effective to do it by eye anymore, All right. Another few questions are, all right, when it comes to APCs, especially when you do it from the submitting from the global south, and you need a waiver or partial waiver or something, do you disclose this right at the start of the submission? Is there a bias in when, that if you're requesting an APC, it might just not even be sent out for review? The journals strongly oppose this, saying that no, they don't do this. Does this come into play?
Not really. Actually, to be honest, so if I specifically talk about the region that I work on, which is South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, these are the regions which offer the maximum APC discounts. So within Sub-Saharan Africa, I think most of the countries there have APC waivers. But like there is no bias as such. So when you go to the website, like on the submission portal, because they're all following the same submission path without any manual intervention in the submission process. So they will, so when you're entering like your details, so there is a part where you enter details about whether you are eligible for any APC waiver or not. So if the country that you're like the country from where your institute is affiliated to, if that country has this waiver status, which could range from 50 to 100% in Africa, a lot of African countries. You put in those details, you'll get those waivers. Within India, we don't have a countrywide waiver as such, but a lot of institutions, we have a lot of institutional partners which have this OA Pro membership with us, under which they enjoy an APC discount, which again has like we get a lot of discounts. So and most of these spaces, these are like prepayment. So what happens is the institution has actually signed this partnership with TNF. So they would allow, say, 25, 30 articles that they will support. So kind of they are like offsetting, they're probably offsetting the somewhat the subscription fee into also supporting the APCs, because now more and more students and researchers want to publish open access articles. So these institutions already have these agreements with us, and a lot of institutions across India, ranging from IIT Kharagpur to VIT, MAHE, a lot of other MSRIT. We have a lot of institutional partners. So that actually, so once the article is accepted, so it will undergo the same review process. Once the article is accepted, the researcher would apply to their to the office that handles these on to whether the office is ready to support the APC or not. So they will they have a dashboard of their own. They'll look into it. They'll see whether how much of those APC credits they have, and then they'll support the APC. So we have, over the years, we have a lot of these institutional partners, and they are, so those waivers, we get a good enough waiver for the articles. Of course, for the author, it's free, of course, because the institution is supporting those, but those are in place. And in Africa, we have, like most of the countries in Africa have like a waiver.
Waivers. So Janardhan also asks whether open access or subscription-based submissions have any variation in the review process. And I think the answer will be no. It's going to be the same.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
I see. I
Absolutely.
see. That's interesting to know. And though Rohan does mention he did face discrimination with a particular journal, you know, it's while it's anecdotal, these are lots of stories that emerge that even after minor revisions, when they ask for a review,
Yeah.
then there is a rejection. So
Right.
it's hard to prove that it was because of the rejection, because finally it was under revision, right, Punyasloke? Until it's accepted, it's not accepted,
It's not.
right? Yeah, that's so it's very hard to prove
That's
that it was because of the waiver request.
right. Because with us, we have like, it's the same. So if we compare those percentages, acceptances percentages of the journals, etc., only depends on the article volume that you would like to take. But usually the revision, the peer review process is never compromised. So they would have the same high standards of peer review for your OA articles and journals as they would have for any other like non-OA ones.
And just at the back end, Madhurima, does the reviewer know you have asked for a waiver? The editor will know for sure, but does the reviewer know?
I don't think so. No, the reviewer would not know. They may guess. I think, like, say, if an article is coming from a certain region in Africa where, like, everybody knows that, they follow that World Bank waiver, like a list of the
Guidelines, country, group
they
A,
would know
group
that
B.
way. And if it is like a single blind a review where they have information about the author, they would know that. But usually no, like they would not know whether this is. And for hybrid journals, it's only after the article is accepted that the authors are given this option, whether you would want, like, if you are able, then you can support it with an
Otherwise,
APC.
it is
If
behind
not,
a
it will just be
subscription
like
sort of.
normal, behind that paywall.
Paywall, yeah. And now just shifting gears a little, Mohammed Hussain asks a valid question. Do you need an academic email ID to publish a paper? Can a Gmail, a Yahoo, can that work?
It is preferable. I don't know, there may be journals that only allow academic IDs, but there is also a constraint that a lot of universities, they don't have the academic ID, so they may be using it. But I think academic ID is something that one should be using for these. Having an academic ID, having an ORCID ID to support that publication, it also kind of helps you add on to that credibility score that you have as an author, and also unique, because these days there are so many ethical plagiarism issues, especially with all those false authorships, and also it's always possible to have that unique identifiers and all for your papers also.
And I think Punyasloke and Madhurima, what are the kinds of these unethical authorships is an article in itself, because recently we encountered gift authorship, ghost authorship. There are several others also. It's not as simple as paid authorship.
No, the list is like, they are just like more and more sophisticated ways
to bypass the actual authorship. And okay, so I guess Janardhan not. His question is there any time variation to publish if it's open access versus subscription? No, because the review process is the same,
Yeah,
right?
journal to journal variation would be there, which whenever you're going to the journal website, you'll see the turnaround times for those journals.
Okay, so I think we are heading to the last 15 minutes. Maybe we'll do some just round up thoughts. We are going to have this session, second session of the workshop tomorrow with Dr. Madan Kumar Anand Krishnan from IISc, who's going to be talking about grant writing. So Punyasloke, you've set it up really well. Both of you have set it up really well to move into grant writing now, which is sort of manuscript and grant writing is like the chicken and the egg. You don't know what comes first and what comes later. So you can do it in any order. And then on Thursday, we have our third session with Dr. Somdata on research sharing. So that's going to be really breaking down introduction, materials, methods, results discussion to broader audiences and groups. So that's going to be exciting. Maybe, Pranav, you can just put the feedback form and survey for today. Are we going to do it on the chat window?
That's going to happen as soon, like it'll, and Pranav can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
That will go as soon as we leave the session, right? It'll
Perfect.
to everyone on email.
Perfect. So any closing thoughts, Punyasloke, Madhurima, or closing thoughts from our participants?
Yeah, I think, yeah, any participant, if they want to unmute themselves or say something. Great.
So, Madhurima, one comment was that this journal suggestor tool is only giving us Taylor Francis suggestions.
Yeah. Every journal, like every
We'll have it
publisher,
so.
because they are actually like crawling into the content that we have and then,
Of
getting
course,
results.
of
So
course.
the other publishers also would have theirs. I think not every publisher has that, but I think the bigger ones who have actually invested in this process to make things a little streamlined for the authors would actually be able to use theirs. So
I guess on that note, we are getting a lot of good feedback from our participants ending day one. It's great. So tomorrow, do join us at 2 p.m. for the second session of this workshop. We look forward to having you there. I guess that's it. Then we can probably close for the afternoon. Yeah, they can use the journal suggester tool in the last few minutes and let us know if there are any issues. Tomorrow we'll meet again at 2 p.m. Same link, right? Same link.
same link. Yeah, it'll be the
Perfect.
same.
Perfect. Thank you for looking forward tomorrow. We are also looking forward to it. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Thank you, Punyasloke. Thank you,
Thank
Madhurima.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Pranav.
much.
so much.
Krishna.
Yeah. Take
See
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you, Pranav. Bye.